All right, if you're looking to remove or replace the oil pan from a first generation four-wheel drive S10 with a 4.3, well, unfortunately, it's pretty much all bad news from here. So specifically, this is a 1992 S10, has a 4.3 liter V6, a 5-speed manual, and it is four-wheel drive.
If you depend on your truck to last, here's news you should never forget.
I have probably a solid 15 for sure, maybe as much as 20 hours of actually working on this car to get the oil pan off, fixed, and back on. Because the problem I had with this is it stripped the drain plug, and that was what kicked off 2 weekends worth of work on this thing.
Chevy S10 Blazer. Chevy truck.
So the tools, that is how many tools I have broken out to get this oil pan off. In addition to a chain hoist, as well as a come along, both pulling on the motor at different points, floor jack and safety jacks. It is not an easy task at all to get the oil pan out of one of these. And there's really no shortcuts you can take with it. Unless you already have a reason to pull the motor, then that's probably the most convenient time to mess with it. I couldn't even find a new oil pan for sale for one of these, so I ended up just fixing this one, which wasn't a big deal. But point being, the oil pan of one of these is not an easy thing to take off. So here is the trials and tribulations I went through to get this pan off, fixed, and back on. All right, I'm gonna do a brief reenactment of what just happened. All right, well, just wrapping up this oil change here. I'm gonna just get this bolt tightened up. And why did that just loosen? You were getting tight. And yep, that's done. Okay, well. So, translation of events. This drain plug stripped. Well, the plug is absolutely perfect. The pan is stripped. Because why would you make the bolt the weaker material and the pan the stronger material? Because at least that way you trash the threads on the bolt, you know, the easy to replace thing. But now that, you know, it's the other way around, the bolt's perfectly fine, but the pan is trashed. So the other good news is this is a four-wheel drive, so that's going to make getting this pan out just about impossible, from what I've read. All right, you join me in the driver's side wheel well. There's the front diff. Everything was going good until I got to this bolt here, which from what I remember on the Silverado wasn't a big deal. However, some knuckle-dragging numbskull did this to me here. I don't know if you can see through that hole, but that's a nut, and it's not welded to the frame. I mean, I can kind of maybe get a wrench on that, but there's no way in hell I'm ever getting that back on. And it looks like the only way to maybe get it back on is to pull the control arm and go through that hole there.
Like a rock, I was strong as I could be. Like a rock. First, J.D. Power and Associates ranked Chevrolet the best full-size pickup in initial quality. Now they also report Chevrolet is the best truck line overall in sales satisfaction. Like a rock.
I mean, what stupid shit is that? Why could it have not just been welded to the frame? Then you could just take the bolt out. Oh well, this thing may be rocking with 3 out of 4 bolts when this is all said and done. Okay, all the bolts holding the diff are out. There's that guy, these two, and then the one bastard bolt up there. So as far as that hole goes, here is the 18mm I used. If it's much bigger than this, it is not going to fit through that hole. Like the open end of this wrench isn't even close to fitting through there. This closed end just barely fits through there. So there's something to be mindful of. And you can see the nut just hanging out there. It happened to come off that way, so I left it, with the theory being that maybe I can take one finger and kind of pop it back up onto the bolt. Yeah, wishing one hand. So then I just came under here, thrashed the diff around a little bit until it fell out of its mounts. Got a pry bar over here, got it pulled forward as far as it's willing to go, and hopefully that'll be enough. It just stretched the front drive shaft out a little bit. So hopefully that'll let the pan drop enough. If not, then gonna have to get creative. So, stupid BS, just like on the Silverado. This adapter, pretty confident, is gonna have to come off, as are the lines. Pretty confident they're in the way of the pan. Yep, for sure. So, get to do that now.
Security.
The sun upon my skin.
I just love this innovative idea of obscure the bolt heads to protect from theft, because somebody might want to steal this oil pan, which is, you know, a pretty expensive part, but oil cooler lines aren't, so we'll sacrifice the oil cooler lines to provide more security to make it impossible to get this pan off. Maybe that's how the board meeting went. I don't understand it though. Alright, credit where credit is due. This adapter is designed way better than the one that's on the full-size vehicles. This one that has, it's kind of hard to see, but there's actually, that flange right there has a bolt that bolts it to the adapter, which is really cool, and is a way better design than those stupid plastic clip connect things that work for, I don't know, a few months at a time and then go to leaking, and then of course they break if you ever touch them. So this design, way better. The downside is this is a 4.3, so I already compared it to an adapter I had off a full size. This adapter will not fit on a full size. It was smaller. Maybe it could be made to work, but I remember looking at it and coming to the conclusion that there's no way to put this adapter on a V8. But anyways, I didn't want to unbolt the lines at that flange if I didn't have to, because whenever so how I did the oil cooler lines on the 68, you know, where you cut the crimped part of the metal off, you flare the ends of it, you put your own hose on it with hose clamps, that whole deal. I did that to this Blazer as well, and I plumbed in the oil cooler, because this one didn't have the oil cooler originally, but the radiator I bought had one, so I went ahead and plumbed it in, and because I was running my own lines, that was super easy. But I got done, went to tighten that bolt, stripped it out, just like this oil pan deal. So here's a little montage from, I don't know, 2 years ago, whenever I had to helicoil that. Gee, that was fun. But anyways, because that has a helicoil in there, I really don't want to be jacking with it any more than I have to. So I just kind of poked it off to the side, and hopefully that gets me everything I need. Alright, so admittedly, this is actually going pretty smooth. I got all the pan bolts out. Now there was that stupid stud that has I think the main starter wire or something bolted to it. And you have to get something pried up against that metal clip, otherwise it just wants to whip the whole wire into the oil pan, and I was kind of worried about it cutting the sheathing on it. So you gotta watch out for that, because the nut on top didn't come loose, it just started unscrewing the whole stud. But, I mean, that's not a huge deal, it's just a slight inconvenience. What is a huge deal, or at least significantly more of an inconvenience, And I knew, despite how smoothly this was going, at some point GM was gonna make this more difficult than it needed to be. And here is such case. Oil pan is loose. Not coming off. Because, just like the Vortec 350 and the 68, it's got this stupid metal plate here. All this plate is just a cover to try and seal everything up, which is fine and dandy, except getting that cover off requires pulling the starter, because it goes all the way up, all the way around the top of the starter. On the 68, I just cut that top of it off so I could slide this plate down without having to pull the starter, which is what's going to happen with this one too. So I got to pull the starter. Then, if you notice, that plate is mounted behind the slave cylinder for the transmission. So I get to pull this, and because this is a hard line and not a braided line, I have to disconnect this, and then I get to bleed the clutch after I get all this put back together, which is great. And I don't remember doing that, but I guess I must have. If I remember right, I had to replace this shortly after I bought the car, and that stripped almost immediately, and I just ran a bolt through it out of anger. And I need to run a little bit of a longer bolt through there. But anyways, it's just stupid stuff like that. I mean, why? I'd rather a little dirt get to the clutch than have to blow all this apart every single time I need to take the oil pan off or something. But it is what it is. So, gonna go eat food, and then come back, and it's gonna be take the starter off, take the slave cylinder off, dump hot whatever brake fluid everywhere from the clutch, and then start taking all these bolts off to get this cover off. And then we get to find out if this oil pan is going to come out of here or not. And I am terrified that it is not, but we will find out. All right, while I'm looking at this again, I take back my advice of prying on this, because upon further inspection, this flimsy piece here is actually bent from me doing that, so get to wail on that with a hammer later. Alright, battery's disconnected, starter's pulled. If you have to replace the starter, I'm really not sure how it comes out, because I had to mess with it for several minutes before I found an orientation that would just barely get it out of the hole. So, not sure what to do with that. In today's episode of Obscured Bolts, there's a bolt for this plate right behind, well, it's kind of between the oil filter adapter and right above the drive shaft. This little 10mm wrench is about the only thing that can get on it 1/16 of a turn at a time. Got a thing of shop towels propping the front of the hood up, so that way I can undo the hood bolts without it flopping off into the cowl or the windshield. And so after you tensile test the wiring for the hood light, you can put the hood back on, and it's not actually bolted, it's just sitting there because the paint on this thing's already torn up. And then you can say, oh, I just need to undo that, unclip this, and then I can pull the light off. Except the good folks at GM ran the wire for the light behind the washer pump, or the washer motor, so you can't get it out. So next option is unbolt the actual light and then just leave it floating in the engine bay. Then the hood should come off. Since I think I forgot to mention, much to my disappointment, on the full-size trucks, you can unbolt the front diff, it'll drop down a little bit, and that gives you enough room to get the pan off. On the S10 platform, that doesn't work. It would appear the only way of getting the pan off is to pick the motor up. You gotta unbolt the motor mount bolt, which is down there. The bolt head is a 5/8, and the nut is an 11/16. The reasoning for that is known only to the guy who put it together. But to get I just put a ratchet on this side of it through this little opening here. Convenient, credit where credit's due. It was nice of them to leave this here. And then I just got on the front of it with an impact and snatched it off. Alright, this motor mount is proving to be way more of a challenge than the other side. The procedure, since I'm working by myself, has been put the breaker bar onto the front of the bolt, crawl under the car. Because there's not a starter on this side, you can get to the nut if you use a swivel. That's the other deal. So this car, I mean, credit where credit's due, compared to the full-size Silverado of the same year, this one is much better about just sticking with metric. The Silverado, it was metric and imperial sockets all over the place, or bolts all over the place. This one, I've pretty much gotten by with just using metric, except for like these motor mount bolts. So that's been kind of nice, but you are still going to need all kinds of metric and imperial sockets. You're also going to need pretty much any combination of extension or swivel in 3/4 and half inch, or what is it, 3/8 and half inch drive. So swivel attachments are absolutely necessary. Deep wall and short sockets are absolutely necessary, and you're going to need both imperial and metric sockets. So I got this guy bound up in here, and kind of the way I was doing it is set this guy here, crawl under there with the swivel and every long extensions and everything, get about 3/4 of a turn out of it, blow the socket off the head of the bolt, crawl back up here, put it back on, crawl back under the car, do the same deal. And I think it's finally loose enough that the Earthquake XT might actually have the balls to take the nut off. All right, here's where either progress is going to be made or stuff's about to get wild. Got both motor mount bolts out. I got this sketchy chain and a suspect grade 5 fastener. It's just hooked onto the original, whatever, whoop-de-doo lifting point. I honestly don't know if the factory ones have that. I don't remember, because this is a crate motor that was replaced at some point. So I don't know if they came from this with the factory, or if that's on there because this was a crate motor or what. But I'm gonna lift up on this a little bit and see what I can get away with. All right, kind of hard to see how much it lifted up, but you can see how the fan is hitting the shroud now. So about at this point, the motor seemed to quit moving and the car started going with it. So I think that is about as much as I'm gonna get out of it. So now I'll see if I can get the pan off.
Work your Chevy truck to the bone, and what does it get you?
Stood there boldly, sweating in the sun. Felt like a million, felt like #1, like a...
All right, so in the automotive hobby, these are the days that make you want to do something else. So I've got it jacked up enough that the transmission's hitting the floor. I've got the diff unbolted and as far forward and down as I can get it to go. And it is never going to come out of there. It's hitting the f***ing diff, it's hitting the f***ing transmission, it's hitting the f***ing engine block. It is not coming out of there. I'm going to regroup and mess with this in a minute. All right, the pan of this turd is finally out. So I had to get another pulling device on the, whatever, the bracket on the back. So that's running up there as well. So I'm picking up on the front of the motor, picking up on this back corner of the motor, and that finally got the pan to fall out. So diff's unbolted, I pulled it forward with a ratchet strap until it, I think the problem is the axles are actually hitting the shocks now, and so that's why that's as far as it's going. And then, I don't know if it helped or not, I went ahead and pulled the drag link out of it, because I thought the diff was hitting that, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. It's out now though. Little spider. So,
reach for America's favorite cold remedy. Chevy's S10 Blazer 4x4 with shift-on-the-fly Insta-Track, optional 4.3-liter Vortec V6, and a new rear-wheel anti-lock braking system. Chevy S10 Blazer, America's favorite sport utility vehicle. And cold remedy.
The heartbeat of America. That's the day Chevy truck.
What a friggin' disaster. What a mess. So I think this is day 3 of this operation, and I finally got the pan out. And much to my relief, there isn't any carnage in here. It's actually incredibly clean. So I don't know what the history of this car was. The guy I bought it from only had it for like 2 years, and I don't think he really did much with it. I think he just kind of had it because it was a convenient deal, and then he putted it around a little bit, but for the most part it just sat. Whoever he bought it from is where this thing just had a really rough life. You know, the fender's been jacked up on it, it's had all kinds of stupid stuff done to it, and it was all kinds of torn up. Front end was absolutely trashed in it. And so whoever had it then really didn't care much for it. Whoever had it, whoever I'm guessing the original owners were, or at least 4 owners ago, must have taken really good care of this, because this is actually a remanned motor. This is not the, well, this may be the original motor, I doubt it, but there's a tag on the side of the block that says that this was remanufactured for GM in 1999. So somebody cared enough about it in 99, 2000 to put a motor in it. And this thing had, I mean, this thing leaked so much oil when I bought it. And the oil that was in it really didn't look great. But underneath the valve cover, absolutely spotless. And again, inside the pan, absolutely spotless. So it had to have had some miles put on it since 99, but for the bulk of this engine's life, somebody actually really cared for it. So pleased about that. I didn't want to find any more problems with this thing. But you can see that drain plug, or that, the threads, kind of just some minor scratching, suggesting that there was ever threads there. So I got some inserts to put in there. We'll see how that goes. And then I'm gonna prop the pan up and tap it and just kind of do a test to see, well, how much metal would have ended up in the pan if I would have just tapped this in with it installed, because I think that might be interesting. All right, setting this up like it was still attached to the motor and drilling it out to see how much shavings ended up in the pan was a little more effort than I felt like dealing with on this. But this is the majority of the metal shavings and parts that it's gonna make. So this piece alone, if you're gonna use the same parts that I am, this is gonna break off inside the pan, so you gotta pull the pan no matter what. If you do a helicoil, you're gonna still have a bunch of this stuff, and you're just gonna have to hope that it, you know, that you can flush it out somehow. And if you remember, that little nub stuck out a little bit, so I'm not sure you could even flush it out. I'm still going with that. Pulling the pan is the only way to guarantee that you don't leave debris in the pan, and is probably the best way of doing it, despite how much of a pain it is. All right, I think I made some progress on this. So what I did is, I usually save all kinds of scrap metal, and this was an instance of it actually paying off. This is the inner sleeve to a bushing, either off of the 280 or the 300, not sure which. It's just over 3/4 of an inch in diameter. Probably about a 32nd of an inch, maybe a little bit more. I wouldn't go any smaller than that. Really, I'd probably go whatever the next size up from 3/4 was. This was just barely big enough. But what I did is I centered it up in the drill press. I used the drill bit that came with the kit, which was a really good drill bit. Drilled out the center of it, which left it just a real thin sleeve. Used a hacksaw, cut the end of it off, screwed up the ends of it as much as I needed. And then I did kind of the same thing on the pan from the other side. I punched it out and kind of just cleaned everything up with a file as necessary. I mocked it up using the sleeve to hold everything together, because I threaded this piece here that's spot welded to the pan, but you can only get like a thread and a half, which realistically is not gonna hold up or seal at all. So that's the reason for this sleeve that I made. So I used the thread repair sleeve to hold everything together, and then I took the drain plug, stripped of its plastic washer, and torqued it up there. Well, first I threaded this into the... Wow, that was just as loud the second time. Threaded this just into the oil pan so it kind of centered itself up, and then I threaded this just by hand onto the drain plug bolt. That way it would kind of self-center itself, because there's no way that I cut this perfectly true or perfectly perpendicular, and there's no way that I even cut the threads perpendicular. So using this to straighten everything out and then just welding in the gap was my way of dealing with the fact that I'm not a machinist. So I put it together, tacked it in a little bit, took the sleeve out of it. Well, actually, I welded it all up and then I tried taking the sleeve out of it, and I had to use just a small impact and just gently worked it in and out. I mean, just pushing the tool into the thread repair sleeve just as hard as I could to keep it from stripping, and I just had to work it back and forth because it got hot and galled itself up just a little bit. So what I would do if I had to do this over again is just tack it 2 or 3 places and then take the sleeve out, weld it up, and then run the tap through it to clean the threads up. Taking the sleeve out at the end was a little risky, so I wouldn't do that again. But anyways, I got the sleeve out, I ran the tap through it, cleaned everything up again. And then, before I welded this on, which it could have been done with a Dremel or with a pneumatic Dremel afterwards, die grinder, whatever, is I cut this little part here out of the bottom just so less oil sits in the pan. Right now, it's about level with the center of the pan, so it's not going to leave much oil in the pan. I'm not real concerned about it. So there you can see how the insert is sitting. So yeah, whenever I had to take this thing out, I mean, I was pushing on this thing with everything I had to make sure that it didn't pop out and strip. I mean, it was a little sketchy there for a second. I was worried about it. But anyways, got it out. So that's as far as it threads in. And also, before I welded this sleeve in, I took a punch and a little ball peen hammer, and I bent in this last thread on the sleeve. So that way, theoretically, there's no way for this thing to unthread itself into the pan. It's gonna hit that sleeve and then be all kinds of jacked up, and it's not gonna thread all the way into the pan. So I got it installed. I put a bunch of petroleum rated thread tape on there, just the yellow colored tape, because the valve has a washer on it, but I don't know if it's gonna catch enough of the oil pan to seal. I mean, it's like right on the lip of it. I think it'll probably seal, but I'm just putting thread tape on everything just because I don't want to have to take this apart again. Same deal with the valve. It's gonna get a little bit of thread tape, and then it's gonna get threaded in. So I clean this out with a wire brush, and then once I get it all together, I'll do a final, wipe through of everything, make sure I don't have any metal in here, and then start putting everything back together. All right, so that's how it's gonna ride, at least for now. So it looks like the orientation is gonna be pretty much ideal. It's stressed in the instructions for this thing to not over tighten it. So I just followed the instructions, pretty much got it to make contact, and then went 1/8 of a turn. And for this pan, it's a EZ 101, which should be a 1/2 inch by 20 thread pitch. So now I just get to go through the mess of trying to get this all installed. While I'm here, I guess this is worth mentioning. So I just used the camera on my phone with the flash on in order to poke the phone up here so I could see down into this adapter. Just because I wanted to see if anything had gotten knocked in here while I was working on it. I didn't see anything. So That's just something to be mindful, I guess, if this thing had been rattling around a bunch and something off the exhaust fell in it. But, I don't know, I shined the light in there, used the camera, and took a little video, and I couldn't see anything that had fallen into it, so I think that'll be alright. But I think that is something worth noting.
You should never forget. Of all the Chevy trucks built in the last 10 years, over 98% are still going strong. That's more than Ford, more than Toyota, more than Nissan. Over the years, no other truck is that dependable, foreign or domestic. Only Chevrolet, the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road.
Oh my goodness. I think I've crawled under this car probably 30 or 40 times. Why is the light not on? Alright, the light's on. Okay, the updates are few and far between because every time I get under here my hands are black with grease and then I have to go wash them in order to handle the camera. But I got this plate back in. I ended up not modifying it in any way. I didn't install the 110mm bolt over there because I fought with it for about 30 seconds and then just decided that 1, 2, 3, 4 is enough to hold it in. I got a longer bolt for that. So this hard line is really the only thing that flopped me because it's just like if this had an automatic, the transcooler lines, if they get tweaked at it's hard line front to back, and if they get tweaked at all, it's just a whatever frustrating experience trying to get them back together. This was no different. I had to fight with this thing to get it lined up because at some point it got tweaked just enough that I couldn't get it to easily go in. I ended up like prying on it from an oil pan bolt. Kind of got it popped in and then pushed the pin all the way through. Which the pin on this one, I don't remember what happened with it. I ended up having to make this one. I don't know if I broke the original one or what. But so that was really the only pain, was getting that back together. If I had to do it over again, maybe I probably wouldn't have cinched the bolts down. I probably would have left these loose and then tried to get the line in. And compressing this wasn't a huge deal. I kind of just had to take one hand, push this in, and then get a bolt started with the other one. It wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be. Oil pan is on. Not a big deal there. Adapter's on. As far as getting the diff in, I got this bolt started first, so I just had a jack under it, and then I was kind of prying around, moving it side to side, forward and back until it finally got lined up. So I got that one started. Then I moved up to that one, and I just poked the bolt through it for the time being, and then came through, got these ones, which of course were cake, got them tightened up. Then I went back up to this one, and I cannot believe I actually got the nut on it with minimal effort. I kind of just, like what I said I was going to try, I just kind of got the nut, balanced it on one finger, found the bolt, kind of flopped it up there, and I kind of just tried with one finger, just walking it around without losing the nut. And I got it barely started, and then I got the 18mm wrench in there on it, and a swivel and an electric ratchet on this side, and I ran it down before it had the chance to fall off into the frame. So super pleased about that. The diff is actually going to have all of its bolts. Other than that, I think the next thing is I got to get the drag link back on, which is going to kind of suck. I got to replace probably at least one. I'll probably just do both tie rod boots because I tore at least the driver's side one trying to get it apart. So that sucks. Other than that, I think that's really everything of note. As far as how this valve works, it doesn't have any oil in it, but you have to push down on it, push up on it, and then twist it. And then it opens. And then, so it's locked right now. And what I'll eventually do is it's threaded right there, and I'll have to figure out what the thread pitch is, and I'll get a little plug just to go in there, just so I feel a little better about it. But yeah, that is the update as of now. Oh, I forgot one thing. So as far as this bracket goes, the easiest way I found of getting a wrench on it is regular open end, and you come up from behind the bracket like this, and then you can get on it. Otherwise, the sides of this bracket, you'd have to have like a deep wall socket or something to get on it, and that just seemed like a hassle. Alright, if you're like me and you used the wrong tool to take all this apart, what seemed to be a really easy way of getting these off is a pair of channel locks. Grab it like this, and then just bend down, and it pops the metal ring off of the tie rod. And so I'm going to put the new boot on there. I'll probably put a little RTV around it, just right here, and hopefully that'll keep water out of it. Oh, this was the part number for the tie rod boots. Made in America. Didn't expect that. All right, not gonna lie, that motor mount bolt is a bitch to get back in. Getting on the head of the bolt, not that big of a deal. It's the same thing as before. But for whatever reason, using the same setup I had, I was really struggling to get the nut on. So it took this apparatus here. You're gonna need about that much extension. And then I had this fancier swivel, which helped a lot, because with the older style, like this guy, every time I'd push on it, it would buckle and then go flying off. And then you're gonna need a deep wall. I don't remember using a deep wall to take it off, but I couldn't get it back on without using a deep wall. So that's the setup to get the nut back on there. What a pain. I've probably 10 or 15 minutes in just trying to get that together. I mean, it's so hard to get to. But it's on now. All right, I got the hood hinges lined up on the Sharpie marks. So time to check the hood alignment. All right. That is acceptable. That's not. All right, for bleeding the clutch, it is a Allen plug thing in the top of the slave cylinder, and it is a 4mm Allen wrench for reasons. All right. Oh, oil change. That's what we were doing. Okay. Now I got to put oil in it. All right, I moved it outside. So far, it's not leaking. I was kind of worried it was going to leak between the valve and the pan. If it was, I was just going to drain the oil, unscrew it, clean everything, put a little RTV on the back side of it, and then thread it back together. But so far, it doesn't look like I even need to do that. So, I'm going to go ahead, drive the car around a little bit, get the oil hot, and see if it starts leaking. And if it doesn't, then I will finally be done with this, and we will call this good.
Listen to the heartbeat of America.
Now there's a powerful new reason to follow your heart. The new 4.3-liter V6, available in S10 Blazer. 28% more power than before, and 50% more torque. The new 4.3-liter V6, the biggest engine ever offered in Blazer's class.
The heartbeat of America.
Chevy S10 Blazer.
That's today's Chevy truck.